Thank you for taking my question. So here is the thing. We spend a lot of time, money, and effort on our kids. For example, the private school, extra curriculum classes on music and sports. So as parents, we are working very hard to support all of this. And we hope that our time, money, and effort are well spent. And the kids would appreciate by fully utilizing this opportunity. I know that this is our desire to probably train the kids, and we shouldn't have that desire. However, it is hard to not expect anything. By this anything, I don't mean to expect that they will take care of us when we get older, or they will buy us something. But we hope they can work to their full potential. Sometimes when we see kids watching YouTube videos or playing games, we feel that they don't really appreciate this opportunity. And why do I have to spend the money and effort on private school, sports, and music? We can save that money to do more good for the society or retire early. And sometimes I think it's my own anxiety that I have to spend that money on kids because I'm afraid that they might fail in the future. So I'm trying to figure out what is the problem I'm trying to solve here. I've been thinking about that for over 2 months, and I couldn't find the answer.
네. 한국 어머니 같으시네요.
You sound like a Korean mom.
자식이 내 삶에 장애가 된다, 부담이 된다. 이러면 자식은 결국 나쁜 사람입니다. 왜냐하면 부모에게 큰 짐을 지어주기 때문에.
So if your child becomes an obstacle to your life or becomes a burden, in a way, it's your child is becoming a bad person, a bad influence on your life because it is, he is becoming a burden.
다른 사람이 볼 때 아이고 애 키운다고 힘들지 이렇게 물을 때 아니요. 애 키우는 게 뭐가 힘들어요. 먹는 밥에 숟가락 하나 얹으면 되고 세탁기 돌릴 때 뭐 옷 집어넣으면 되고 저는 애 키우는 게 힘들지 않습니다. 이렇게 얘기하면 또 애하고 있는 게 저는 더 기뻐요. 이렇게 얘기하면 자식은 어머니를 부담스럽게 하지 않고 어머니를 행복하게 하기 때문에 어릴 때부터 벌써 좋은 착한 자녀가 되는 것입니다.
But on the other hand, if somebody asks you, it must be difficult raising a child, and you can answer honestly saying, no, it's not difficult at all. It's just a matter of placing another place setting, a table setting on the table, or just doing a little more laundry, right? That I usually do. So basically, if the child, it's really a source of not extra burden, but another companion pleasure. And that child is somebody that brings lightness and life and pleasure to your life.
자식을 키우는 게 내가 좀 힘에 부치면 자식에게 당연히 기대를 많이 갖게 되고 자식은 그 무거운 짐을 지고 인생을 살아가야 되기 때문에 굉장한 속박을 받게 되고 심리적으로 어떤 의무감, 책임감 이런 것으로 인해서 마음이 매우 무거워집니다.
So if raising a child is difficult or new, and then that naturally leads to higher sense of expectations from you to your child, that leads to a sense of entitlement as a parent against your child, that creates a sense of guilt and burden on your child as he or she grows up.
그 무거운 짐을 견디지 못하게 되면 나중에 포기하게 되면 결국 포기하게 되면 이제 행동이 이제 함부로 부모 말도 안 듣고 이제 저항적으로 행동하게 됩니다.
And if your child finds that burden, the weight of their expectations too heavy, then he or she might give up. And that might translate into a different reaction. It could be resistance against your authority. It could be acting out against society or whatnot.
아까 조금 전에 질문자가 말했듯이 애가 유튜브 보는 것도 내가 자식 키우는데 별로 힘이 안 들면 뭐 유튜브 보거나 유튜브 안 보는 게 좋겠다 이 정도가 되는데 내가 너무 많은 돈을 많은 시간을 아이에게 투자를 하게 되면 그걸 보면 아이에 대해서 실망하게 되거나 미워지게 됩니다. 나는 이렇게 너를 위해서 고생하는데 너는 유튜브나 보고 있냐 이런 심리가 일어나기 때문입니다.
So basically, if you mention your child watching YouTube and you feeling disappointed or asking that question, and why am I spending all these resources and time on my child when my child just watches YouTube and games, naturally leads to that because you're actually investing so much resources and raising that child difficult for yourself.
그렇기 때문에 이것은 자녀의 이렇게 정신적인 건강에 좋지 않는 결과를 가져온다고 저는 생각합니다.
And that leads into a non-healthy situation for your own child.
그다음에 이제 두 번째 조금 다른 각도에서 살펴보면요.
By looking at this problem from a different perspective, from a different angle.
저는 한국의 시골에 가난한 농부집에서 태어났습니다.
So I was born and raised in a very poor farmer's family in rural Korea.
아버님의 관심은 오직 농사 짓는 것입니다.
So all my father paid attention to was farming.
제가 어릴 시절은 한국에서 초등학교가 의무 교육이 됐습니다.
So when I was little, elementary school became mandatory in Korea.
그래서 모든 아이들이 다 학교에 의무적으로 오도록 했습니다.
So that was when every kid had to start going to school.
만약에 그러지 않았다면 저는 초등학교에 못 갔을 수도 있습니다.
And if elementary school was not mandatory at that time, then I probably would have never gone.
그래서 이제 학교에 갔다 오면 저는 공부를 하고 싶은데 아버님은 학교에 가서 하루 종일 놀다 왔으니까 일을 하라는 관점입니다.
So basically, when I came back from school, I actually wanted to do homework. I wanted to study, but my father had the perspective that I spent this 8 hours in school having fun, so now you have to work.
농부 입장에서 볼 때 학교라는 것은 하루 종일 가서 노는 곳입니다.
Because from a farmer's perspective, schooling was kids having a good time for 8 hours for the whole day.
근데 학교 선생님은 또 숙제를 내줍니다.
But then again, the teacher at school actually wants us to do homework.
학교 갔다 와서 이제 숙제한다고 마루 위에 엎드려 있으면 아버님이 짝대기를 가지고 마루장을 때리면서 야 이놈아 공부를 한다고 돈이 생기나 밥이 생기나 당장 일하러 가라 이렇게 고함을 칩니다.
So basically, when I came back from school, I would lay down on the floor because I didn't have a table and start doing my homework. My dads would come in with a stick and start beating the floor, making loud noises and yelling at me. You can't earn money by studying. So go out and work.
그러면 이제 책을 집어 던지고 이제 일하러 가야 합니다.
So then I have to put away my book.
겨울에 이제 밤에 공부한다고 호롱불을 이렇게 켜놓으면 그 기름 따른다고 밤에 자라고 불 끄고 자라고 오래 못 켜게 합니다.
And also when I come back and it's dark out, so I need to study, so I use this lantern that would burn oil in order to light the way so I can actually see what I'm writing. He would then yell at me because those oil costs money. So he would force me to turn it off and just go to sleep.
그러면 늦게까지 공부를 하려면 이 문에다가 담요를 가려서 불빛이 바깥으로 새나가지 않도록 해놓고 이제 공부를 해야 합니다.
So if I did want to study late at night, then I would actually have to study under a blanket with a lantern on, so that he would not spy the light coming through the doors.
제가 이 얘기를 길게 하는 이유는 한 가지입니다. 부모가 하지 말았는데 내가 공부를 할 때는 공부는 놀이고 재미가 있고 적극적입니다.
So the reason I'm telling you this story is just one thing, right? So when I'm studying, despite my parents telling me not to study, then study for me became play. It became an enjoyable thing to do.
그 다음에 농사일을 돕는 것은 부모가 강제로 시키기 때문에 나한테는 굉장한 힘든 노동입니다.
So then at that time, because my father wanted me to work at a farm, in a plot, farming, then farming became a lot of work for me. It became something I did not want to do.
근데 지금 시대가 바뀌었어. 부모가 아이들에게 공부를 하라고 온갖 것을 갖춰놓고 하는 것은 저희 부모님이 나한테 호미도 주고 낫도 주고 농기구를 주면서 농사일을 하라 하는 거와 똑같이 아이에게는 노동입니다.
But today, we live in a different world in which the studying is now farming. So today's parents telling their kids to study is the same thing as me experiencing my father giving me the tools to go out and farm and dig on the ground, into the ground and plant.
그리고 자기가 유튜브하고 게임하는 것은 내가 책 보듯이 그 아이에게는 놀이가 됩니다.
And they're watching YouTube and playing games was me trying to study, right? Now it becomes a source of enjoyment and relaxation for the kid.
그러니까 부모가 생각할 때 공부할 수 있는 조건, 방도 주고 불도 켜주고 책도 사주고 학원도 보내주고 이것을 아이가 고마워할 거라고 생각하는 것은 착각 중에 착각입니다.
So basically, you providing all those resources, including a nice house, all the food, extracurricular activities, sports, and tutors, so that your kids can excel at studying, and you think that your kids should be grateful for that, is your own mistake. It's your own misperception.
거기다가 피아노도 배워, 바이올린도 배워, 태권도도 배워. 이것은 아이에게 하드워크 넘어서 학대에 들어갑니다.
And then you're putting on top of that studies. You got to learn taekwondo. You got to send them to piano. I got to learn violin. All the other skills that your kids has to go through to learn. That goes beyond kind of encouragement. That's abusive to the kid.
그것은 고마워하기는커녕 엄청난 저항심, 나중에는 복수심까지 생겨납니다.
So your kid naturally is not going to be grateful for that abuse. Instead, it's going to create a reservoir of anger and rage that might explode in the future.
그렇기 때문에 사춘기가 되면 다 집어치우고 친구들하고 어울려 놀면서 강력하게 저항할 위험이 있습니다.
That's why when they get to their teenage years, they become somewhat independent, autonomous. All that resistance and rage is going to come out, and they'll give everything up and just want to hang with their friends and act out.
그러니까 고마워하겠거니 나중에 내 기대에 부응하겠거니 하는 것은 전혀 가능성이 없는 일입니다.
So the fact that you think your child is going to be grateful for what you're providing him or her, and that it's going to live up to your expectations, there's no chance that's going to happen.
그것은 부모가 매로 아이를 때리면서 이거 다 네 잘 때라고 때리는 거야. 알았지? 이러면서 때리는 것과 같습니다.
The same thing as in the previous generation, my parents beating me and saying that this is for your own good as they beat me. That's the same thing.
그러니까 제가 처음 질문할 때 한국 부모님 같다 이렇게 말씀을 드렸는데 이렇게 아이들에게 하는 것은 내 인생도 허비하고 아이에게도 좋은 영향을 주기가 어렵습니다.
So that's why I made that half joke in saying that you sound like a Korean parents because that's what they do here. So, if you do this, then you're actually just causing suffering to yourself as well as your child.
모든 것이 다 이렇게 하면 나쁜 결과가 나온다는 뜻은 아닙니다. 이렇게 하면 나쁜 결과가 나올 확률이 훨씬 더 높아진다는 겁니다.
Of course, I'm not saying that this way of teaching or educating a child is going to all lead to bad results. But what I'm saying is that it's likely to lead to a result that you don't want.
왜 이렇게 합니까? 나도 힘들고 아이도 힘든데.
So why do this? Because it's difficult for you, it's difficult for the child.
그러니까 조금 더 아이가 꼭 원한다면 조금 부모가 부담이 돼도 해줄 수는 있습니다. 꼭 나 태권도 배우겠다. 꼭 나 학원 보내줘 엄마. 학원 가서 내 공부 좀 더 할래. 이렇게 정말 아이가 원해서 원한다면 저는 부담이 돼도 해줄 수 있다고 생각합니다.
But if your child really wants to do something, really wants to learn taekwondo, really wants to learn, be better at a certain subject, then, it might be a stretch for you, but, you can actually make those resources available to help your child.
그런 경우는 효과가 날 확률도 높고 고마울 확률도 높습니다.
But in those cases, your child will be grateful and you'll have good results.
그러니까 아까 질문자가 공부할 조건을 다 갖춰줬다. 그거는 우리 부모님이 저한테 낮과 호미와 모든 일할 농기구를 다 갖춰줬는데 이놈이 일을 안 한다 하는 거와 똑같습니다.
So when you say in the beginning your question says that you provided all the resources and condition for your child to study and to do well, the same thing as me, my father telling me that I gave you all the tools necessary, a scythe or hammer, whatever, to go out and farm and be productive.
얘기하세요.
Go ahead, see if you have any reaction to that.
Thank you for the example. I think the example helps a lot. And talking about why am I doing this? I think there is something outside and also inside. For example, it's not just Korea. It's China, Japan, or Silicon Valley. It's everywhere for this generation. Or I would say, like parents have a lot of anxiety about how their kids can continue to be competitive in the future. And for myself, I think I've been practice in the last several years to try to not think that way. And especially after I took the Buddhism 1 classes, I read a lot of books, and I know that in the future there might be many things may happen in the future, and so I do not really have that expectation to hope that my kids will be competitive in the future. But I'm always looking at myself. It's my path. It's how I became a person as I am today. I think it does have some. It could be part of the reason because I was as a kid that my parents have a lot of high expectation for me, even though they didn't really have spend any the money on tutor or on some courses or activity. But what they had was still the expectation. Like if you go to school to study, you have to try your very best, to fully utilizing your potential. And that is something I carry on for, I think for my whole life. Even I work today, I would say I have to try my very best at work. Even I do some housework, I would say I have to try my very best to keep the house clean, something like that. So even it's not about the money or resources, I feel like I was raised up and it kind of carried on to my expectation on my kids that I hope you can do your very best. Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
네, 대부분 다 부모들은 자기 경험의 범위 안에서 아이들을 가르칩니다.
So, all parents, we teach our kids within the sphere of our own experiences.
지금 질문자나 우리 세대는 학교에 가서 이 지식을 쌓고 기술을 익히면 세상에 나와서 여러 가지 이 경쟁의 우위를 점했습니다. 즉 노동 효율이 높았습니다.
So in your generation as well as mine, we went to school, we attained this knowledge, skills, and abilities, that would actually give us a leg up in competing, in the world after we graduate.
즉 산업사회에 필요로 하는 노동력을 제공했기 때문입니다.
Basically, we were fine-tuning ourselves as needed parts and resources for an industrialized society.
근데 지금 산업사회 이후 디지털 사회가 되면서 이런 지식과 기술은 대부분 인공지능이나 자동화 이런 것으로 점점 대체돼 가고 있습니다.
But as we can see today, as we transition from an industrialized society to more of a digitalized society, a lot of things that we have, a lot of the skills and knowledge and skills are being automated and are being replaced by artificial intelligence or robots and other things.
그렇기 때문에 현재 학교 교육은 미래 사회에 적합한 효율적인 그런 노동력을 제공하는 그런 훈련이 아닙니다.
So, the training that we give our kids today in school is probably not the right type of training to actually get them ready for the next generation, for the next world.
그렇기 때문에 너무 부모의 경험에 기초해서 자꾸 아이들에게 얘기하는 것은 맞지가 않다. 그 아이들이 사회에 나와서 활동을 할 때는 지금부터 20년, 적어도 30년 이런 후에 사회의 중심 세력이 된다고 볼 때 그때 어떤 사람이 그 사회에서 필요한 사람이 되겠느냐를 염두에 둬야 합니다.
So, we don't want to kind of anchor our advice to our kids and our, nurturing of our kids in our own experiences, which are going to be outdated anyway. And we have to keep in mind that our kids, when they become the decision makers of their society and their times, 20, 30 years in the future, is going to be living in a vastly different world.
두 번째는 부모가 이루지 못한 꿈을 자녀를 통해서 이루려고 하는 부모의 그 욕심이 자녀를 자기 길로 강제로 편입시키는 그런 경우가 많습니다.
Also, another phenomenon we see very often with parents is that, driven parents, they want to project their hopes and dreams and what they were not able to accomplish onto their own kids and kind of try to accomplish that through their kids.
그러니까 자녀를 한 사람의 인격으로 존중하는 것이 아니라 나의 소유물로 생각하고 있는 것입니다.
That means that you are looking at your kids as not an independent, autonomous being, human being, but as an extension of yourself, as your own possession.
내가 제한은 할 수 있지만은 내가 간 길을 자녀가 꼭 가야 된다. 이런 것은 잘못된 생각입니다.
So you can suggest different career pathways for your child, but to insist that the child walk the path that you are not able to walk, or you have walked already, that's not the right way.
이것은 부처님과 부처님 아버지 사이에 일어났던 갈등입니다.
And this is the same conflict we see that happened between Buddha and his father.
부처님 아버지가 생각할 때는 붓다가 가는 길은 정말 바보 같은 길이다 이렇게 생각한 겁니다.
So from Buddha's father's perspective, the path that Buddha wanted to walk was a very foolish path.
그러니까 우리는 자녀에 대해서 기본적인 서포트, 지원은 하지만은 지나친 강요, 간섭, 기대 이것은 저는 한 사람의 인격으로 존중해 주는데 존중해 주는 게 아니다. 이것이 사랑이 아니다. 이렇게 생각합니다.
So I think we as parents should provide the basic necessities and the conditions of safety and security to our child by, kind of enforcing our own viewpoints or over interfering or intervening into their lives shows a lack of respect. It's not love. It's a lack of respect of your child as an independent, autonomous person.
저는 부모님께 항상 감사하는데요. 그것은 제가 오늘 여기에 이르는 데 있어서 부모님이 특별히 도와준 건 없지만은 방해, 장애 요인은 아니었습니다. 우리 부모님은 학교에도 다니지 않았고 또 가난했기 때문에 내 가는 길을 방해할 만큼 그런 힘이 없었습니다. 그러나 오늘날 이 배운 사람들, 지위가 있는 부모는 아이의 길을 방해할 수가 있다는 거죠. 도와줄 수도 있지만 방해할 수도 있다. 저는 도움을 못 받아도 방해하지 않는 것이 제가 오늘 여기까지 오는데 가장 큰 도움을 받았다. 오히려 이렇게 생각합니다.
So I'm actually very grateful to my parents, and in a place where I am here today is because they did not have the capacity to actually interfere with the path I want to walk because they were uneducated. They were poor farmers in rural Korea. So they were not actually able to give me any help on my path, to reach where I wanted to. But at the same time, they were not able to or choose to interfere with my path. Conversely, in today's society, a lot of parents are wealthy, very educated, and they have the capacity to help their kids. But conversely, they also have the capacity to interfere with their kids and allow their intentions to kind of be projected through their kids.
지금 질문자가 자녀에게 여러 가지 학습 도구를 제공해주고 결국은 내 뜻대로 내가 시킨 대로 해라. 이거는 한 사람으로 존중하는 게 아니라 나의 노예를 만들겠다는 것과 다름이 없습니다.
So the fact that you are providing all these resources and opportunity for your kids, but also expecting them to take full advantage and kind of adhere to your expectations, then you're kind of showing a lack of respect to your own child, and you're trying to make your child, do what you want them to do.
조금 제가 심하게 얘기해서 죄송합니다.
Sorry for coming up a little too strong here.
I think that is a great perspective to look into that way. Regarding the lack of respect to the kid, I know that, but I mean, we don't often remember that when our mind was kind of driven by the expectation to the kids. But I think you are quite right. That is a lack of respect to the kids. Thank you.
네. 자, 두 분, 한 번 더 질문자가 있었는데 취소를 했어요. 여기서 마치게 되는데 혹시 여기에 대해서 코멘트를 할 분 있으면 해주시기 바랍니다.
So we had one more pre-questioners, but I don't think he actually showed today. So that's it for the questions that was kind of pre-submitted. But at this point, I want to open up the floor and ask for any reactions and feedback and comments from people.
Free to, yes.
Yeah, I think the second question, I'm not a parent yet. I might become a parent, maybe, I don't know when, but in the near future. But the second question it felt relevant to me, all the more because I might become a parent soon. Where I live, there's Indian parents, Chinese parents, Korean parents, creating an amazing academic environment, right? On one end, it's really good if your kids can excel. On the other hand, if they fall behind, it's amazingly pressuring and stressful for them. And it's not too, we sometimes hear unfortunate stories about, children or, students who end their lives because of the stress that they get from schools and because it's so competitive down here, right? So on one hand, there's that going on. And then on the other hand, I also fully believe that our current education system is neither scalable nor sustainable. I think it's gonna quickly lose its relevancy in the near future. But how much, so I fully believe in enabling, kids and they're empowering them to make their own choices. But how much is me trying to meddle with their lives and how much is me trying to support them, making decisions on their own? I think that's the tricky part. And I think the balancing is the real difficult part. And I think, if I become a parent, I can imagine myself, kind of swaying back and forth, on one day I'm trying to support them, trying to empower them. And then the next day, I'm, putting my own greed and, attachments, putting those upon them. So I think the second question gave me a lot to think about as well. That's it.
네, 우리는 어린 자녀들에 대해서 기본적으로는 지원을 해야 합니다. 그러나 그것이 나에게 과한 부담이 되거나 아이들에게 억압이 되지 않도록 해달라는 부탁을 드리는 겁니다.
So in essence, as parents, we owe it to our kids to provide them the support, the basic necessities to nurturing. But we don't want that to actually be a burden to us and become an obstacle and source of pressure and suffering for our kids.
네, 다른 또 코멘트 있습니까?
Any other comments?
네, 특별히 없으면 질문자 소감을 듣겠습니다.
Thank you, Sunim. And I think today it's great to hear different perspectives, especially the example in the past. And I mean, I think it's going to be like coming back and forth. And I've been learning the Buddhism for more than a year. I know this is not really easy to change, but I'm happy that I realize I already have this the mindset that I might be wrong. I might be holding another different perspective most of the time. I think that's really helpful. And I'm really looking forward to the Buddhism 2 class, and I'm really looking forward to your visit to San Jose. Thank you.
한국에 대해서 교육열 이걸 좋게 생각하는 분들도 많이 있습니다. 그러나 한국의 세계에서 타의 추종을 불허하는 자살률 1위, 그리고 젊은이들이 아기를 낳지 않는 출산율이 1도 아니고 2는 고사하고 1도 아니고 0.72 이런 수준까지 떨어진 것들을 우리는 살펴봐야 합니다. 과연 우리가 그렇게 출세하고 그렇게 돈을 모아서 무엇을 할 것인지, 그 속에 아까 그 젊은 분이 얘기하듯이 성공적이지 못할 때, 그 부모의 기대를 따라가지 못할 때 자살하고 죽어가는 수많은 젊은이들이 있다는 것을 우리가 좀 더 살펴봐야 할 것 같습니다.
Right, that's a great point in the discussion. As you know, there's a lot of positive kind of treatment about the educational levels and fervor in South Korea, but at the same time, keep in mind that South Korea suffers from the highest, suicide rate, especially among young people, with a birth rate approaching 0.72. So, it comes back to the fundamental questions. What are we going to do with all this wealth and professional achievements that we are creating? What's the other side of that coin? What's the suffering? What's the dark side of that professional achievements and wealth? So those are the questions we have to struggle with.
우리는 우리의 자녀가 어떤 사람이 되는 게 좋으냐, 지위가 높은 사람, 돈이 많은 사람, 유명한 사람이 아니라 나의 아들, 딸들이 가장 행복한 삶을 살았으면 좋겠다. 자유롭게 삶을 살았으면 좋겠다. 그래서 행복지수가 높은 사람이 됐으면 좋겠다. 그런 관점을 저는 부모들이 좀 가졌으면 어떨까 싶습니다.
So I think it's important for us, if I had any advice to parents is that, asking yourself the question, what kind of a person do I want my child to turn out to be? Is that a famous person? Is that a rich person? Is that a professionally accomplished person? Or do we want our child to be a happy person, a person who's free, who has that capacity and the resiliency to sustain and care for his own, happiness?
네, 오늘 여기까지 하겠습니다. 다음에 또 뵙겠습니다.
So with that, let's conclude our talk today, and I'll see you again next time.